Good evening. Welcome to the next installment of our Two Medicine Voices speaker series. It's really good to see everybody here tonight. So thanks for coming out on a really sunny, beautiful Wednesday in July for our talk. I'm very excited for our speaker tonight. My name is Peter Metcalf, and I'm the Executive Director of Glacier-Two Medicine Alliance. And we're the conservation organization here in East Glacier that's sponsoring this year's speaker series. So we're, again, just grateful to have you all. Before I introduce our speaker tonight, I just want to just briefly tell you a little bit about our work as an organization and some things that we have coming up over the next couple months that might interest you. But Glacier-Two Medicine Alliance, like I mentioned, we're a grassroots conservation organization that's based here in East Glacier on the Blackfeet Nation. And we work to protect lands, waters, and wildlife, particularly in the Badger-Two Medicine, which is an area of unprotected national forest land immediately south of Glacier Park. But we also work in Glacier Park and some of the Flathead National Forest as well. In addition to some of our advocacy work around federal lands management and policy, we also do a variety of stewardship projects around weeds and trails and other things. And we host things like the speaker series and other educational outreach events. A couple things we have coming up this summer that might interest you, especially if you live here in the area. We're having our first ever Two Medicine community weed pull. Noxious weeds is a real issue around here that degrades wildlife habitat and water quality and impacts culturally important plants for the Blackfeet people. And we're organizing a community weed pull up in the Badger-Two Medicine on Saturday, August 6th. We'll do some pulling. We've got a hot lunch that's being provided by Rising Wolf Ranch, and we'll have some great speakers on weeds education, including from Pend Oreille County, from the Rocky Mountain Weeds Roundtable, and Mariah Gladstone, who is kind of an expert on traditional foods within the Blackfeet Nation, talking about impacts of plants. So it'll be both an educational time and a chance to help us fight the scourge of noxious weeds. And then I also want to point out that coming in September, if you're around here, is our fall gathering, so 23rd through 25th of September, and it's always an amazing weekend. So we have early bird registration going on right now on our website. But it's a weekend full of, we have some fabulous speakers. Hal Herring's going to be our keynote this year. If you're familiar with some of Hal's work, he's a journalist out of Augusta. We have live music, we have meals, we have a benefit auction to help support some of the work we're doing. And then we have a bunch of organized hikes into the Badger-Two Medicine as well. So it's a great chance, just kind of a community celebration of lands, conservation, culture, community that we have every year. We invite you to come and be a part of it. And then finally, I would like to invite you, if you're interested in to join and support Glacier-Two Medicine Alliance and the work that we do to help put on speaker series like this, as well as some of our work to help protect the resources around this area. Right now, thanks to the generous donation of one of our members and a grant from the Cinnabar Foundation, all gifts to the Glacier-Two Medicine Alliance between now and the 16th of August will be matched dollar for dollar. So there's never been a better time this year to consider joining us. You can do so either at glacier2medicine.org on our website, or we have some information in the back. Afterwards, I invite you, after we get through our speaker tonight, to hang out. We got lots of information on our events, chat, share, ask more questions of Mark. We've got a few board members here in the house, so I don't know if you're a board member, if you raise your hand. Feel free to check out and ask them any questions you have about ways to get involved with the work we're doing. Happy to share that with you. But mostly, we're just really grateful that you're here. If you're sharing your vacation, welcome to the Blackfeet Nation in Montana, and I hope you have a wonderful time in Glacier-National Park or wherever it is that brought you out here today. So with that, I want to introduce Mark Biel. Mark is the Natural Resource Program Manager for Glacier-National Park, and we're really honored to have him here with us today. His division of the Park Service is responsible for pretty much all things wildlife, I think is fair to say. Mark's been with Glacier National Park for about 12 years now, correctly? And with the Park Service for 28 years. Previously has worked in Yellowstone, Bryce Canyon, maybe a few other places. Has a lot of really fascinating research going on right now on different wildlife species, not just mountain goats, which is what's going to be the focus of tonight. And Mark tells me that he's always interested in trying to figure out things about species that we don't know much about, and mountain goats happens to fall really into that category. If any of you are on social media or spend time in the summer up at Logan Pass, though, you might know Mark better because of his dog, Gracie, who's known as the Bark Ranger, who helps keep goats and bighorn sheep away from people, which is a really important job in the park, especially in that area right now. So I imagine Gracie might figure somewhere into tonight's talk. The Park Service, with Mark's study, has been looking at mountain goats, which of course are kind of emblematic of glacier and high mountain regions and are native to lots of parts of Montana, but certainly not all of it. And we're very excited for kind of what they've been learning in terms about population trends, habitat use, movement, both inside and outside of the park, and what that might portend for wildlife movement more broadly. As many of you know, protecting a lot of our big game species, like grizzly bears and mountain goats and bighorn sheep, requires a much broader landscape than any of our protected areas alone can provide. And so helping to both maintain healthy populations in the park and across a broader landscape means that it's important that wildlife can move across those places like Highway 2 and the railway corridor here. So Mark will touch on some of that, what they're learning about both goat movement and what it might mean for other species. So really excited to have you tonight, Mark. Thanks for making the trip over here, and look forward to your talk.
I'm just going to figure out which side I'm going to operate better from. I'll block your view, so I'll stand over here. So anyways, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. I always like giving talks like this. I've given several talks on mountain goats in the past, and I had a talk already last week. I decided this morning at 10 o'clock to blow it up and start again, so you are my guinea pigs on my new presentation. So if you don't like it, I don't want to hear about it. No, it'll be good. It'll be good. So like Peter said, I'm talking about goats and Glacier, and the goals of this presentation, and they're not sequential. I'm not going to go 1 through 6. They're going to be kind of mixed together. I'm going to cover on the past research that we did on the mountain goats, specifically up at Logan Pass. Mention the increasing visitation and climate change challenges that the park is facing and how that might be causing some behavioral changes in the mountain goats that we've been seeing. And then also touch on some current and future research. And then mixed into all those topics is going to be a little bit of connectivity. Goats don't really have like the long connectivity treks that you might expect with a bear. They're not going to move 40 miles in a day. At Logan Pass, there's certain like little micro connectivity corridors that we found. And then other places like at Goat Lick, they'll cross the road using that underpass there. They'll cross the river, they'll get up on the mountains and go into the forest. So there's definitely a porous border right there with the park. So kind of landscape scale connectivity and local scale connectivity in this. But first I'm going to start with the study that we did in 2013 to 2016. And like I said, that was up at Logan Pass. And the big concern about that was we're just starting the process of going to the Sun Road Corridor Management Plan, because we were seeing, starting at about 2011, 2012, visitation just going like this. A lot of congestion on the road, a lot of congestion everywhere along that corridor, every place in the park. We were seeing a lot of human-wildlife encounters. And if you've ever been to Logan Pass, this is pretty familiar right here. This is probably 2010 when it was Jurassic parking. Now it's Logan Pass parking. But we don't have the Stegosaurus or T-Rex roaming around anymore, but we do have the bighorn sheep and the mountain goats up there. So the reason for the concern with human-wildlife encounters is not only the issue of human safety, because wildlife are unpredictable, even the habituated wildlife. I'm going to try and hammer that home all night tonight, so that when you're up there and you have friends or family up there, you can set them straight when they say, oh, look at the goat, let's go pet it. We don't want to do that. So it's bad for the people, it's bad for the wildlife, it's bad for their health, and if they do get aggressive, it's usually pretty convincingly bad for them if we have to remove them from the population. And then as we'll see, there might be some ecological consequences too with all that. So for that study, what we wanted to learn, we basically knew very little about the goats in the park. There were some studies done by Doug Chadwick and Frank Singer did some studies, and then there were some other observational stuff. There were some smaller studies going on in the park, but people would ask me all the time, and it's like, so where do those goats from Logan Pass come from? And I was like, I don't know, the parking lot, Logan Pass, and maybe they took a shuttle. I don't know, but we didn't know. We didn't know if it was the same group of goats up there all the time. We didn't know if a group would move in the spring and then move further down the line and some other group of goats would come in behind them, and if we had multiple populations up there. So that's one of the things we wanted to figure out. And then we wanted to learn the timing of those movements to Logan Pass and what that might mean. So, and then also the relationship between goats and humans, and is there any goat-directed aggression to humans up there? Because people get really close. People do some crazy things up there, and we have had in the Park Service goats actually killed people at Olympic National Park in 2010. A man got gored and severed his femoral artery. So their horns, if you've never seen them, they're like knitting needles that have been put in a pencil sharpener. They're super sharp. So I don't have any pictures of it, but when you handle a goat, the first thing you do, you find an old garden hose and you cut it about this long. And step one is cover up the horns so that you don't get stuck. And then another thing we did in this study was we looked at analysis of the natural salt licks up there versus human salt urine. So antifreeze, other fluids that might leak from cars or people. So what we were able to do, we were able to get 24 mountain goats captured up at Logan Pass, and this again is just specific to the Logan Pass area. We got 17 females and 7 males ranging from 2 to about 10 or 12 years old. That one's a really old one that we captured up there. We got 8 GPS collars out, and then 16 of your standard VHF collars. For goats during the study that weren't collared or marked, if we saw them kind of acting strange, interacting with people or people interacting with them, we wanted to learn more about those goats and how they move. So we actually would go up there and then we would mark them on the side with a paint or some kind of wildlife branding ink so that we could then track them for a certain amount of time to see if there was a consistent activity or something that was drawing them in. We learned, quite a bit. We learned some 5 natural mortalities, and we saw some large movements. And these will be the interesting ones that I'm talking about. There's some natural movements we saw from these goats to natural mineral licks. And then there's an actual pretty interesting anthropogenic migration that we were seeing up there. I'll show you that in a bit. So it was a comparative study. We had the goats at Logan Pass that we collared, then we had the other goats that we called the backcountry goats. On some of these slides, you're going to see habituated for the Logan Pass goats and wild for the backcountry goats. But at the time I did the slides, I wasn't thinking, and the more I think about it now, I don't like that distinction because even the habituated goats are still wild and they're still very unpredictable. So I'm going to try in here to say backcountry versus habituated goats, but if I slip into some of that old vernacular, that's what I'm saying. So why do the goats use Logan Pass differently than they do in many other areas of the park? We had 3 hypotheses. The first one was that maybe there's more minerals up there because the goats are very mineral deficient after spending a winter in the cliffs, scraping the lichen off of the rocks. They come down, especially the females that have kids or are about to give birth, they're very mineral deficient, so they're looking for anything that, get their mineral content up. The other hypothesis was maybe the forage around Logan Pass is just better than anywhere else in the park, and that's what draws them into that area. And the third one was that maybe there's so many people up there that they act as a human shield for these goats, and they keep most of the predators out of that area. So those were the 3 hypotheses that we tested. And just so you know, I could probably give a 45-minute talk on each one of those hypotheses, but tonight we're just going to skim the top off of these, and I'm just going to summarize it by saying it's not minerals. So, simple as that. Yes, human salt, when we analyzed it, had 5 times more sodium than the natural mineral sources, but when you look at the total volume of minerals in this park compared to what the people pee and leave along the trail in Logan Pass, it's not even close. So there's not any more minerals up there. There's not better minerals. It's just the answer on that one was no. And better forage, what we found up there was, for the most part, the forage is just about as good or bad as any other area in the park where the goats hang out. And in some areas of Logan Pass, it's actually worse just because it's getting trampled with increased visitation. So it wasn't that. So then, that kind of left us with the human shield concept. And so what we did to figure that out is when you're in grad school, you'll do anything for a meal ticket. So this is Wesley Sarmento. He was the grad student on this project. And we wanted to look to see when we presented a stimulus to either the habituated goats or the backcountry goats, how they responded. If we expected, there to be a diminished response to predators or threats from the habituated goats, if this is truly what's driving the equation here. So we came up with an ungulate surrogate. We came up with the human. That was easy. He was there already. And then we came up with a predator surrogate. And those of you that went to U of M probably recognize Monty there. So that's what we did. And, they look kind of silly. They look like something I would make for my daughter for Halloween, and my wife would just shake her head. But if the goats felt that way, whether they're habituated or whether they were the backcountry goats, we should see a consistent response then across the line. So what we saw, these are the habituated goats. When Wesley put the deer costume on and he came walking out of the woods, they couldn't care less. They didn't move at all when he came out of there dressed up like a goofy-looking deer. When he came walking out, they might have moved a little bit and said, "Oh, what's that?" and then went back to whatever they were doing. When Monty came walking out, the bear, they moved about 50 meters away. Even then, they were like, "That doesn't look like something I want to hang around." So we see that, but it doesn't tell us what the real story is until we look at what the backcountry goats do. So if you look over here, even the backcountry, those truly feral wild goats that when they see a person they take off, they couldn't care less either when the deer came walking out. No response from them. When the human came walking out, when they saw Wesley, they went over 100 meters away. They just didn't like the people being there. And then look what he did there when Monty the bear came walking out. They went over 250 meters away. So definitely we see that diminished, dampened response to risk from these habituated goats. And so there's another component to the story that I don't have time to run through that was actually very interesting as a result of the 2015 flyer over in St. Mary. If you want, I can run through that after the presentation. But suffice to say, based on that little hint I gave you and what we have here, that what's going on is the human shield is the main driver, and then a secondary benefit to that is that these goats can get salt without fear of predation. So a lot of these mineral licks are in the backcountry. You got goats walking through forested areas for sometimes up to 10 or 12 miles. There's predators hiding in those woods, mountain lions, grizzly bears, black bears, coyotes, wolves, whatever. Why would you do that when you can come in this nice area and there's people everywhere, and there's maybe only one or two bears that you can run away from? So that's pretty much why they are staying up at Logan Pass in such close proximity. Another thing we did to look at that is we put out some camera traps and we did some track surveys in 3 heavy visitation areas around Sperry Chalet, Hidden Lake, and along the Highline Trail. And then we looked at 3 natural mineral licks. And you can see, for the most part, there's a lot more predator detections in the areas where there's no people. So I'm not saying there's no predators where there's a lot of people, because in the past few years, if you've been around Logan Pass, it's been closed a couple times because of that sow cubs that loves to chase those goats and eat them if she gets a chance. She's there for the same reason. She's protecting those cubs. If she's hanging out in an area where there's a big boar, that big boar is going to try and kill those cubs so that he can breed with her again. So she's there for the same type of reason, and the fact that there's easy pickings with these goats that are exhibiting some weird behaviors, which we'll get into here. One of the things we found in this study is that the backcountry goats, when compared to the habituated goats, were 18 times more likely to bed on the cliffs. So if you see right here, that's a goat bedded on the cliff, which is where you would expect one. When one's sleeping, you're not paying attention, something can sneak up and eat you. They're going to sleep somewhere where that thing can't get to them. This is not a scene you would expect with Danny and Kid laying down in the middle of a trail about, over 100 meters from escape terrain. That's a long way for a goat to run. They don't run very fast. You can see the backcountry goats, they don't even usually go more than 60 meters away from that escape terrain, because if they see something like we saw in those previous slides that looks like a predator, they want to get away. So, another thing that we saw was that the habituated goats, when they were feeding, they would be 6 times further from the cliffs or their escape terrain than those backcountry goats. So This is not a natural scene. This, more natural. There's not really much for them to eat up there, but they find what they need up there. Anyways, you see the habituated goats, they're usually, sometimes more when they're feeding 150 meters or more away from their escape terrain. Again, that's a long way to run, whereas the wild goats, they don't even get 50 meters away. So you can see a lot of this stuff, increasing visitation is starting to change some of the behaviors of these goats at Logan Pass compared to some of the other areas in the park. Another thing we saw was that backcountry goat groups had about twice the number of individuals as the habituated goats. And you might say, hey, what's the big deal? But if me and my friend George are taking a hike and we're goats, and all of a sudden a bear jumps up, there's a 50-50 chance the bear's going to eat me or going to eat George. If there's 10 of us, my odds just went down a lot on me being the one getting eaten. Chances are someone else is going to. So there's that safety in numbers. So they stay in larger groups, they stay closer to the cliffs, they bed on the cliffs for these backcountry goats. We're not seeing that behavior for the Logan Pass goats. And then vigilance is another thing. If you're a prey species, you're always looking around. It's like something moved over there. What was that? Because you're afraid you're going to get eaten. We're seeing, the backcountry goats were 5 times more vigilant when they were accessing salt than the Logan Pass goats. You're up there, they're just kind of walking around, looking, not paying attention. Or, if you walk into a mineral site at a backcountry location, and usually they're gone before you even are able to step out of the woods because they heard you coming and they're just taking off. So it's that vigilance thing. You want to be paying attention to see what's going to come get you. This is some of that localized connectivity that we see up there at Logan Pass. One of the things that we're seeing, and we're still not quite sure which is which, but the theory, we see for 2 of the goats that we had collared up there that had GPS collars, they would start at Logan Pass and they would actually go up over the ridge and down into the Swift Current Valley over on the mini glacier side to access a backcountry mineral lake. Only 2 of them did that. All the other goats would hang around Logan Pass, Hidden Lake, and they would just stay right in there. So we're seeing what we think is goats at one time would probably make these long treks to these mineral sites, but now with more people showing up and more minerals being deposited on the ground along the trails and in the trees, no need for them to do that. So, excuse me, getting all choked up. So, that's something different too that we're seeing. So we're kind of losing, we think, some of that long distance migration. I'm sure that this goat probably taught her kid that, but at some point, is that going to fall off the table? Or are we going to see maybe more goats learn? We don't know. So. This is the cool one I was talking about, the novel migratory behavior. Okay, I mentioned that goats love salt. Okay. This guy, you'll see him again on my last slide in the presentation. He became infamous. But we put a collar on him at Logan Pass, and if you overlaid a trail map on here, it would almost line up perfect. He would go down to Sperry Chalet, he would go to Logan Pass and hang out, jump on the Highline Trail, he would go over to Granite, hang out, come back down, go to Logan Pass, come back down to Sperry. That's all he would do all summer long. Back and forth, back and forth. So again, a lot of people are learning new behavior. We're not going the 14 miles over the ridge into the mini glacier valley. He's roaming where the people are. A lot of salt, a lot of people, a lot of protection from predators, easy pickings. So. Another thing we looked at, we actually came out with a paper on this, so how long was it now? 5 or 6 years ago maybe, about the importance of snowfields on here. We saw a lot of goats on the snowfield, and we were like, I don't know, are they eating it? Maybe they're thirsty. Is it cooler? Maybe there's fewer bugs, combination of the above, we don't know. If you've ever been on a snowfield in summer when the biting flies are out, they tend to stay away from those areas, so maybe that's what it was. But the graduate student was out there, and he went around to different areas in the park. This snowfield here used to be a lot bigger, and it's just shrunk over the years, as things warm up. But the goats still like to come here. Thought I had these circles might come out. But there's a goat up here, there's a couple goats over here, and they're hanging out there. They're never too far away from that. And so what we started doing is we would go out. Oh, there's a circle. I didn't look at it now. How many of you saw 3 goats? You guys are good, all right. So anyways, we've actually found that snow patches are actually pretty important for the goats, especially as climate change is accelerating. Global warming is proven is occurring more rapidly in the high mountains and high elevations. In the past 20 years alone, some of the papers are showing that temperatures above 13,000 feet are increasing 75% faster than altitudes below 6,500 feet. These goats are already standing on the roof of the house. As things get warmer, they need to cool off. They can't go any higher. So what are they going to do? So what they do is they'll hang out on these snowfields like this, and what we would do is we would go out there with a spotting scope and we would count respirations. If you're hot, you know your dog gets hot, what do? They sit there and pant. That's a lot of energy expended to cool off. If the goats don't have to do that, then they're actually saving energy. It helps with reproduction. It helps them survive through the winter and not become carrion. So what we found is that the goats that lay on the snow actually reduce their respiration rate by 15%. And then it's like, oh, well, they can just stand in the shade and do that too and cool down. It's the same thing. But no, it's not. We watched the goats in the shade. We watched the goats in the meadow. We counted the respirations. The respirations did not decrease when they were standing in the shade. They only decreased when they were standing on these snowfields. So snowfields are very important. So as climate change continues, these snowfields keep getting smaller. Maybe some of the glaciers become snowfields. Are we going to see the goats move to them? Are we going to see them redistribute on the landscape? So those are kind of things that we're thinking about now and trying to figure out ways that we can figure out how to find that out. You know, what questions do we need to start asking? Where do we need to start looking? This is just a cool map we came up with. Again, we didn't know where the goats at Logan Pass would hang out. I can't remember why I didn't put summer on there, but you can see this is heading up from Lake McDonald. This is, Avalanche Creek is right down here. The campground's right there. The goats spend the winter pretty much all right in there. And then as spring comes, they'll move back slowly towards Logan Pass and then hang out there. Again, there were those few goats that would go over into the Mini Glacier Valley, but for the most part, I think the traveling goat that would follow the trail, he's about the only one that would go over to that Haystack Butte or up to the Granite area. All the rest, pretty much, they were homebodies and all stayed right around in that area. So, it's pretty. We're finding it with bighorn sheep and most of these mountain goats is they're pretty particular about where they stay and they're specific to a certain area. I always wanted to turn the GPS collars on and see, as the plows got up there and the goats heard them, did they just start running over that way? But that's not what happens. For those people who don't that like graphs, this is kind of a cool thing. The GPS collars we put on there have accelerometers on them, so you can tell when the animal's moving and when an animal is sedentary. And you can see this is a September goat. So about 7 or 8 a.m. Until that time, they're kind of sedentary, and then they're moving quite a bit. Might rest during the afternoon, a little more active, and then they crash again for the night, and then they pick it up all over again. You can see how wide that activity bar is. It's pretty much from say about 7 or so until about 8 at night. Then as October comes along, you can see it's still fairly the same shape. It's a little more constricted, so they're not moving as much or as long during the day. As November comes along, again, similar shape, but it's starting to get constricted in the sidebars here, and maybe not as high, so they're starting to kind of settle down. Things are getting colder, snow's starting to fall. They don't want to waste that energy and deplete their fat reserves. December comes along, 8 o'clock they move, and you can see, these are moving over 200 here. This is less than that. That's about 8 a.m. to maybe 6 a.m. They're active, and then they're sedentary most of the time. January, when it's really cold, again, still the same similar shape, but again, it's compressed both from the side and from the top. So I think I have a cool slide, if I can make this work. Keep your eye on this red dot right here, this one. And I apologize if anybody is colorblind, because the PI on the project with me is, and I didn't know that, and I presented this, and he was like, I didn't see the dots, but I apologize. I'm really good at GPS or GIS applications that are 15 years old. The new stuff I can't keep up with, and my technician's gone. So, anyways, can everyone see the red dot right there? Yes. Okay, good. Now I'm going to try to figure out how to make it go. Keep your eye on that one, because that is the one that made the excursion all the way over into the area there. And then we're starting at August 29th of 2018. So you'll see, is it August, September, October, they're moving quite a bit. And then as it becomes January, December, January, February, that movement's going to be straight. So figure this out. There we go. And there's eventually going to be more goats on there. So now we're getting to the end of September. You can see they're still moving around quite a bit on the landscape. We're early October now. Still moving around, but not quite like they were in August. Now we're getting into early November. Starting to get colder. You can see the movements just start to kind of restrict. We're in the middle of November now. And you can see that now they're not moving near as much. They're conserving that energy, trying to make it through the winter. Now we're in early December. And yeah, there's not much movement there at all. Now we're in January. I think this goes until February, so we're almost done. But I just like watching the movements. The red one just made another big movement there. But you can see this is the end of January. Things are cold, and the dots are just like vibrating on the landscape. They're not moving in very many places. Now we're in the middle of February, and I think that should be it for the month here. Yeah, right there. Anyways, so there's many factors that go into the constraint of their movements on the landscape. Weather, snow cover, fires, visitor numbers, things like that. A combination of all the above.
Is it a gender effect?
This was both male and female. We had I'd have to look at the numbers again to remind you, but most of these were female. There might have been one or two
I
males.
saw the yellow dot moved a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
The
red dot, it was a female. And I believe, where's the other one?
The yellow one.
I think she was female too, yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So the females are going to be more mineral deficient than the males because of the parturition, developing that fetus, and then lactating once the kid is born. So. Yeah, there we go. I don't want to make you watch it again. So again, with climate change, we're seeing an expanded fire season. We're seeing more severe fires. How does that affect the goats? Again, I think that one's still kind of up in the air. For the most part, they're above tree line. I mentioned that some of the times they're going to these backcountry mineral lakes and they're traveling through forest. I guess you could hypothesize that if the forest burned down, it might open things up and it might make it easier for them to get to the mineral lake. Don't know. One thing we did see on Mount Brown after the big fire there is that these goats would come down and they would chew on the bark. They would eat the bark, so they must have been getting some minerals from that also. Pretty interesting. Especially when you come down and you see a goat that has like black stripes roaming against the trees and you think it's a zebra. So, it's kind of funny looking. I didn't get a picture of that one, but it was very distinct white and black. It's funny looking. And again, I think I've shown what increasing visitation is doing. We're seeing just way more people. These goats are changing their behavior at Logan Pass. Whether that's good or bad, it kind of depends. One of the things we wanted to do after that study is we wanted to look at one that kind of looks more park-wide and is trying to suss out some of these climate effects on there. So what we were able to do on that one, we were able to get 28 adult goats out, radio collars, and we did 5 areas of the park. We did Logan Pass, we did Goat Lick, Highway 2, We did Little Dog Lick, which is a backcountry mineral lick. And then we did the area around Sperry Chalet and Lake Ellen Wilson, and then Mount Brown also. The goats we captured, we put ear tags in. All of the goats got GPS collars this time. And then we would swab the nose and back around their tonsil area, looking for any of these diseases out there that really impact their sheep and goat populations. Luckily, all the tests we got back were negative on those, so the goats are clean so far. And then we also collected blood and hair for DNA, and the blood we can do some metabolite work because we did some of that with the Logan Pass goats because we were interested with all the petroleum stuff they were looking up off the parking lot. You know, if a cat or dog does that, they're, you know, pretty much deep six. The goats doesn't seem to bother them. So probably because the ruminants or something. They picked up a few of the metabolites in their blood system, but nothing at any level that was even on the chart for concern. So it's kind of interesting finding that out. That's one of the questions we get is, all that antifreeze, are they going to die? It's like, apparently not. So somehow in their digestive system, they're able to handle that. So we did ground darting, and we also had some clover traps, which are cages about yay big and about yay wide and about 6 or 8 feet long. Put a mineral block in the end, the goat goes in there to lick it, and it trips a trigger, and the door comes down, and we're able to go up and hit it with a jab stick and tranquilize it that way. So it tends to be a little safer for all the goats and the handlers. We're continuing the snowfield study. We want to get more information on that just to see, you know, more data is better, and just to see how important those snowfields are, and if there's certain ones in certain areas that are more important than others. And then we're also looking at experimental hazing. Again, with so many people coming into the park, we're having those interactions, and the goats tend to get aggressive, especially, you know, if a goat, it licks someone's shirt and they think it's cool and they let them do that, and then 3 days later someone else comes up there and the goat tries to come near them and they chase it away, the goat gets mad, and then that person pays the price for what the person did 3 days before. So we want to, you know, we have all the traditional methods like shooting bean bags or cracker shells. You can put rocks in a can and shake it and run at them like you're, you know, kind of a madman or something, and usually they just stop and look at you. And then, but we're looking at using slingshots to try and hit them in the hip to drive them away that way. Bear spray in certain areas also.
I'm assuming the slingshots are for the humans, not the goats.
Yeah. The goats have the horns, so they put a rubber band on there and they have a buddy pull it back and they fire back at you. That's not true. Yes.
So earlier you had said that, and I don't know if it's a hypothesis or a result of a study, that there were fewer goats per, I guess, a breeding pair in Logan Pass than elsewhere, the backcountry goats? Because there were more goats in the backcountry, thinking that because the predators can eat more of them?
Yeah, I don't think we've been able to tease out like where there's more goats in the backcountry. There's definitely, you know.
I was just wondering if you knew if they had different ranges, territorial ranges, and Logan, if the Logan Pass goats versus the other ones, they go further?
Yeah, so like I said, the Logan Pass goats pretty much hang out at Logan Pass, and a few of them make that jump over. There's those goats that hang out at Haystack Butte. None of our goats interacted with them, and we weren't able to capture any there and mark them, but we don't think any of them really came over to Logan Pass either. So I think they have pretty defined areas and territories that they hang out in. So.
Well, I was just wondering if the habituated goats maybe had a smaller territory, and that impacted the number of kids that they had?
Yeah, we didn't really see a decrease in the number of kids. If anything, the habituated ones' kids are probably going to have a better chance of survival.
Okay.
And but I would probably say, like the Logan Pass ones probably have a smaller home range than some of these more backcountry ones that, you know, have to travel more and have the mineral licks in their territory and stuff. So, yeah. What else do we got? All right. So basically, you know, with this new study that I think this is the last year we're wrapping it up, and but we're going to try and come up with something where managers can predict the demographic and distributional result of goats on the landscape using some of the stuff that we're looking at related to climate change, whether it's snow fields or temperatures, because the collars we have on not only have the accelerometers, but you can also, I can log onto the computer, pull up a goat collar, it'll tell me what the ambient temperature is where that goat is, so you can actually get a temperature reading from where it is on the ridge or on the snowfield or something like that. So anyways, this is all stuff I mentioned before. We're looking at impacts of climate change, any demographic changes. Again, that's kind of where you come in there with the kids, the survivorship of the kids, and when goats do die, is it going to be more males, more females that die, or things like that. Resource selection is a big one. I'll touch on that in a couple slides here. Thermoregulation, the mechanism related to that. That's kind of the observational stuff on the snowfield that we were talking about. And then how goats impact their local communities. They're up at Logan Pass, but everything, if you look at bison, they have a huge impact on the landscape, not only on the grasses, but the other species that come there. What kind of impact do the goats have that are like that? Some of the future studies, and actually maybe not so future, because that first one, population dynamics using goat pellets, we actually started that, and there's a gentleman here that actually went out and collected some for us right over there. Thank you very much. So working with the USGS on that, and Jamie Biel with the Citizen Science Program, collecting fresh goat pellets, and then we can look at DNA from that. If we want to, we can look at the diet that they're eating. We can also look at stress hormones, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But anyways, what that information will give us is, we could look, for instance, at the Logan Pass goats and how interrelated are they? Is there enough genetic diversity to keep that population going strong? Are we seeing goat genetics from Mini Glacier or from Haystack mixed in with this population at Logan Pass? What do the genetics look like at, the Goat Lake on Highway 2? We're seeing actually there, the goats, we captured all the goats right under the bridge on Highway 2, and 5 of them pretty much spend all their time on the forest. So they've gone down, they've crossed the river, and they've been hanging out up on the banks above the reservoir. So pretty cool stuff. One of the things that I've been talking with Tabitha about, and I think for those of you that were here for her talk last month, she mentioned that decrease in the population that they've been seeing based on the citizen science data. I'm not quite ready to go there yet. I'm not saying it's not happening, but in the 12 or 15 years since those sites were set up, we've seen a lot of differences in temperature. We've seen a lot of increases in vegetation. We've seen a lot of these snowfields disappearing or diminishing in size. So one of the things we want to do, not only with the goat collar data that we have out, but with future goat collar data that we get, is look at the habitat use and the timing of that use. Because maybe, and I've talked with Tabitha about this, and we're still friends, it's okay. We can disagree and still get along. But maybe, those points are static and they haven't changed. Maybe the goats are still there, but now they're just somewhere where you can't see them from that location. So one of the projects I would like to do is get up and do aerial observations while people are on the ground doing the counts and compare the numbers between the two to see how they rate up. If they match pretty good, then yeah, the goats are gone. Did they go somewhere? Did they die out? We don't know. So more of that is what we'd like to figure out. And then stress hormones. When you collect these pellets, stress hormone is another thing you can look at. You've been up to Logan Pass. The goats kind of walk around. They seem pretty chill. Compared to a goat in the backcountry that, just came 12 miles through the forest, and every snapping twig, freaked it out because it thought it was going to get eaten. Their stress hormone is going to be pretty high. But are these guys really less stressed than the backcountry goats? I always go back to the story when I worked in Yellowstone. How many have been to Yellowstone in the winter and driven the snowmobiles and snow coaches, and you got the bison walking right down the road this far from you, and you're like, they're so cool. They don't mind us at all. We did a study on the glucocorticoid stress hormones from those guys compared to the ones that hang out in thermal basins and other areas of the park. They're about 3 or 4 times higher from the animals on the road than the ones in the backcountry. So super stressed, but less energy expenditure to walk on those nice groomed roads, dealing with the people to get what you need to increase your chance for survival. So So I think it wouldn't change any management directions that we do, but I think it would be a good story to tell people, because walking up to them and saying, stay away from the ghosts, doesn't seem to work. But if you tell a good story, like, if you get close to ghosts, they get stressed out, their hair falls out, who knows what happens, maybe, they don't make it through the winter. But, if you're stressing them out, you're decreasing the chance of survival. Maybe that might work better, I don't know. So anyways, that's what we see, the future studies, we got the goats changing all this migratory behavior, loss of migration to natural salt licks. So we're seeing actually in these habituated goats increased aggression between themselves. So, because again, I'm going to get this pile of pee, not you. You go hike the 10 miles to the backcountry like you get eaten by a bear. I'm staying right here.
Right.
So they definitely more aggressive and overprotecting those. So at some point, where's the balance? Like I keep saying, we're seeing increased visitation. We're seeing all these populations of goats and sheep and other animals hanging out in these areas. Somewhere there's going to be a tipping point. I don't think we've reached it yet, but at some point, I think we're going to. I don't know what it looks like. I can't even predict it, but I guess we'll see it when and if it happens.
Do you ever place salt licks out there?
What's that?
Do you ever?
No.
No.
Only when we were doing the trapping,
Okay.
the clover trap, yeah. So anyways, that's my talk. Hopefully it wasn't too boring. I would like to thank the National Park Conservancy, because it was their private donations that funded this current study that we're doing with the mountain goats, and without them, it wouldn't have been done. So thank you to the Conservancy, the folks that lead Glacier-National Park, actually Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. They came and helped us do the goat captures and collaring, because they had all the experience doing that in the past, and they taught us. So that was really cool. And then all the Park Service and employees and the volunteers out there that help us out with it. There's the goat I told you would see again on top of the visitor center. We caught him in 2014 when we put that collar on him, and then we caught him in 2019, and he was still alive, but he was showing his age. His teeth were really loose in his mouth and stuff, so he was getting up there, and he made it one more winter, and then he wound up dying up on the slopes, just down between the road and Haystack Butte. So,
What's their
natural.
No, I mean normal life.
They can usually, 12, 15 years, so sometimes longer if you're a lucky goat or sheep.
Yeah, Mark, what's the average number of hikers on the Highline now?
Oh boy, I'd have to get you the numbers on that. I couldn't even hazard a guess. It's a lot. How about we say a lot? We've been studying those trails for, I think we have data going back to the 80s, and we're doing that in the 80s, Steve. Monitoring the numbers on there, and
Must have been 0 today.
I think it was, yeah. That's, right now it's still closed, but that doesn't mean people won't try and hike it. So, but yeah, it's a lot. Yes, sir.
Aren't you finding that some of the older dominant males aren't they pushing the younger males out of the herd?
What we've been finding is that the male groups, whether they're old or young, tend to get along, and the more infighting we see is with the nannies and kids. So much more aggression with them. Once they hit a certain age, the male goats pretty much leave until it's breeding season, but up until about maybe 3 or 4 years old, they'll stay with the nanny kid group, and then they're off on the run until breeding season. And a lot of the aggression that we saw was the females, again, protecting those anthropogenic mineral sources.
Well, I'm talking about like an instinctive effort to preserve the bloodline and push the young males to another herd.
Yeah.
Don't most herding animals do that?
I think so. We didn't really look at that in this, so I don't know to what extent it happens. I'm sure it does, but most of the male groups we saw, they're pretty chill. Is there a question over here?
When you did your comparisons between the habituated goats and the wild or backcountry goats, what did you choose, what populations or which groups did you choose to study for the wild or the backcountry goats? Was it a number of geographic locations or just one location?
A number of geographic locations, yeah. We had to do that because some of them, we could get up there into a position to monitor them, and then others, one day we would try and you'd be half a mile away and they'd be running towards the cliffs, and other times they'd let you sneak up on them a little bit, so we definitely had to spread it around. So.
Anthropogenic, that's the one in your mind?
Human influence, anthropogenic. So anthropogenic minerals are minerals as a result of humans. Yes, sir.
Do we have a population estimate that's reliable for the total population of goats in the park? And does that meet the requirements of conservation biology for long-term viability in this, like the next 100 years?
Yeah, I think Steve was one of the last ones that did an aerial count. And then we have Jamie's thesis, Jamie Biel, who's in citizen science. The estimate we have is a wide range, anywhere from 1,200 to 2,500 goats. Right now, with the data that we have, that's about the best we can do. Part of the thing that we're hoping to find, we're going to be collecting those goat pellets from goat populations all over the park, and hopefully we can get the DNA results from that, and that'll inform that a little better. So. Yes, ma'am.
Do goats normally live in small family groups, or just the mother and kids, or do they raise their young more communally? Is it more separate? And does that differ based on Logan Pass, which is more backcountry goats? Because I know you mentioned the Logan Pass ones do tend to be in larger groups. It seems
Logan Pass are in smaller.
Smaller groups, because they seem more comfortable, quotes. But in general, do they raise their young communally, or just a couple of groups, or?
They hang out in groups. I don't know that, they necessarily share the nursing duties or whatever, but they tend to have the nannies and kids in a group. Except for, Logan Pass, I think the biggest group we saw was 4 nannies with their kids, but that was probably the biggest one we saw, Logan Pass. But you see bigger groups than that when you're working some of these backcountry mineral lakes.
Mostly just nannies and kids, though.
Mm-hmm.
Males are kind of doing their own thing in bachelor herds kind of thing, and then there's the maternal groups.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Are there specific times when the goats come from the cliffs to the pass? I remember when they were doing the construction on the pass 5-10 years ago. The goats would come in at 4 o'clock to graze, and you could just almost actually watch them.
Yep, that has changed. Much like the Logan Pass parking lot filling up. When I got here in 2010, you could still get up there at 10 in the morning and you can find a parking spot. Now, I'll go up there with Gracie in the mornings, and we get there at 6:15 in the park, and they're already doing the ant crawl, 6:15, 6:30. And even 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, we would see sheep in the parking lot that early. And now, by the time we get there at 6:15, they're already up in the hills. And I'll ask people that have been there, if the sheep were down there, and they say, no, they haven't been here all night.
Parking's good at 3.
What's that?
Parking is good at 3.
Parking's really, in the afternoon or in the morning?
Afternoon. I don't know about morning, that's a possibility.
Might be good at 3 in the morning. So a couple more hands, yes, sir.
We know that there's some connectivity from the Goldwick area through the underpass over to the National Forest.
Yep.
Is there any DNA studies that show how genetically similar perhaps the bears in the Great Bear Wilderness area south of the park are with those in the park? And is there any other areas along the Highway 2 corridor that could potentially function as, if underpasses, for example, were built to allow transfer and dispersal of goats from the park into the Great Bear Wilderness, southwest of the park?
To answer the first question, no, but that's one of the projects we're working on with this goat pellet project. We're partnering with the Forest Service and with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, but they're strapped as we are with staff, so we're going to be kind of limited on just how far down into the bob we can get. But we're definitely going to get some of those areas, those districts closer to the park, where we're going to collect those genetics and just do the exact same thing you said, compare that interrelatedness and where are the genes coming from, and and there might be a weird genetic that we don't know, and who knows where that one came from. But the second part of your question about the overpass, we haven't seen any congregations. I don't think we've had a goat hit by a car or very few since that underpass went in. There's no other areas on the highway that I know of that they're crossing, but there is a project that Tabitha Graves was working on with John Waller about locating connectivity corridors on that highway. And I remember looking at some of the data. I don't think there were many, if any, goats crossing anywhere but Goat Lake, but I've always learned to never say never and always avoid always.
John Weaver of the Wildlife Conservation Society did a study on the Flathead Forest, and one of the animals he looked at was mountain goats and the potential for crossing the Highway 2 corridor. And he said that the best indication because of the closeness of the mountains would be from the Essex area to the Devil Creek area, that section of the highway. And within that section is where the underpass at the Goat Lake is. But he also mentioned the possibility of goats maybe moving from Rabbit Mountain in the park to perhaps the Tranquil Basin and Paola Ridge areas south of the highway. And maybe those would be areas in the future to consider for some kind of overpass or underpass construction to allow goat movement. What do you think about that possibility?
Yeah, I think with the collars that we've actually had some goats go up running rabbit. And actually, they don't still hang out there. They've gone to the west and to the east, or here's a different way, gone to the west and to the east of Goat Lick. But we've never seen them come down to the road. They always come back there to go under it. So, not to say again that the occasional one might try it. But, so. Is there another question over here? Yes, sir.
Just one question about your 2018, the climate change study, and you're looking at, what was it, demography and their movement or something like that. Is that just trying to be predictive for your habituated goats or for all the goats in Glacier Park or what?
We're trying to, from the 5 areas that we've got them, we're trying to predict it from there, realizing that the majority of the goats we have are habituated, so we have to be careful based on the different behavior that we've seen in Logan Pass to not attribute those behaviors as 100% what's going to happen in the backcountry. Likely that it could, but yeah, that's kind of the thing, you come here, it's like, oh, steady goats and Glacier, that must be what they all do. It's like, no, actually the ones in Logan Pass are kind of different. So, Peter.
Mark, yeah, thank you for this talk. This is great. And picking up on Greg's questions around the Highway 2 corridor, I had a conversation recently with your colleague John Waller, and we were talking about, we put a lot of emphasis in the conservation world and the wildlife world about the possibility of the railway and the highway to separate populations of goats and other species. We haven't spent much time looking at going to the Sun Road, and that obviously has even higher traffic densities most hours of the day during the summer tourist season. And I guess my 2 questions is, one is, in your data you looked at, are there specific spots where the goats cross Logan Pass, or not Logan Pass, but cross going to the Sun Road? And 2, is there any, related to that, any interest on your part in kind of studying how goats might move across?
So the crossings we've seen on Sun Road, a couple of the collars that we had in that winter range above Avalanche Campground, for whatever reason, one of the goats would take off and go through the campground, cross the road. Of course, this is in the wintertime when there's no traffic, go up the hills on the other side, and then come back almost span of about 3 days. Why? I have no idea. Crossing up at Logan Pass, it seems like they cross like right there around the Highline area. I don't know if they use the crosswalk, but they should.
Thank you.